She bought the tiny workshop for just $400. No insulation, no working lights, and a roof that sighed when the wind hit right. Ella Ramirez wasn't looking for a miracle, just a space to fix what she could and forget what she couldn't. But buried beneath the cracked concrete floor was a rusted drain grate no one had touched in 50 years, and behind it, a tunnel that would lead her not only to millions, but to a family secret that had been sealed underground for generations. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories. And if stories like this speak to you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode might just uncover something even deeper than this one. Let's get started. The real estate agent didn't even get out of the car. She handed Ella the keys through the rolled-down window and said, "It's yours now. Good luck." Then she drove off, tires crunching over the gravel like she couldn't get away fast enough. Ella stood alone in front of the squat cinder-block building, the sky behind her bruised with early evening clouds. The workshop looked more like a forgotten utility shed than a place where dreams could take shape. A corrugated metal roof sagged in the middle. One garage door hung crooked on its rails, and a faded sign above the entrance read, "Ramirez Auto," the letters ghosted by time. She hadn't known it was still there. She hadn't known it was hers. Not until her mother passed and left her a safe deposit box with a deed inside. Ella slid the key into the front door and pushed it open. The hinges shrieked in protest. Inside, the air was musty and warm, thick with the scent of oil, mildew, and forgotten time. Dust floated in slanted beams of late sunlight. One broken workbench leaned against the back wall. The concrete floor was cracked like old skin. A single fluorescent light flickered once and died. No one had stepped foot in here for years. And yet, somehow, it still felt like home. She dropped her duffel bag by the wall and sank onto an overturned milk crate. It was the first quiet she'd had in weeks. No eviction notices, no slammed doors. No one calling her kid or telling her what she couldn't do. Just space. Empty. Broken. Hers. She took a breath. The air tasted like rust and history. Her phone buzzed. A low battery warning. She ignored it. Instead, she pulled out the folded newspaper clipping she'd been carrying since Laredo. Small town property listings. As is. Cash only. There was a circle around the address. $400. No inspections. No promises. It had felt like a scam. Still did. But now that she was here, standing inside this wreck of a building her grandfather once owned, it felt more like a challenge. Or maybe a calling. She ran her hand along the wall, feeling the cool cement under her fingers. Something about the silence was different here, not empty waiting. She'd been a mechanic since she was 17, turning wrenches in other people's shops, getting paid less than the men around her, but working twice as hard. This was her first real shot at something of her own. It didn't look like much, but it was something. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The air shifted. A soft breeze moved through a broken vent in the ceiling, and with it came a faint metallic sound, not wind. A hollow clink, almost like a chain brushing against a pipe. Ella froze, then slowly turned toward the back corner of the shop, where a rusted grate sat embedded in the floor. She hadn't noticed it before, until now. Ella crouched beside the grate, brushing away years of dust and debris with the edge of her sleeve. The metal slats were thick, rusted over with age, and one corner had sunk slightly into the concrete as if the floor itself was slowly swallowing it. She gave it a cautious tug. It didn't budge, but the sound it made, that dull, echoing clink, told her there was more beneath it than dirt. A void. A space. Something hollow that had no business being under a mechanic's shop. She sat back on her heels and stared at it, heart beating a little faster, the way it does when something strange and forgotten suddenly becomes personal. She spent the next hour exploring the rest of the shop, but nothing else was half as interesting. A few old spark plug boxes, a rusted-out engine hoist with a frayed cable, shelves full of brittle, empty oil containers. Everything pointed to a life-interrupted tools left mid-use, cabinets half open, Bolts and washers scattered like someone had intended to come back and never did. And always, in the back of her mind, the quiet pull of that strange corner of the floor. By the time the rain started, she'd swept most of the dust into a pile and uncovered a faded floor plan sketch stapled inside one of the cabinet doors. It wasn't official, just pencil on yellowed graph paper. But there was the shop's rough layout: entry bay, tool room, office, bathroom that no longer existed, and in the far back corner, a square labeled "Drain Access Sealed." Ella stared at it. Same spot, same grate. The rain came harder now, drumming on the roof like fingers tapping in thought. She stood in the center of the room and watched as water pooled near the grate and swirled briefly before disappearing downward. That didn't make sense. The building didn't have a working plumbing system. The listing had said so. The drain should have been capped or collapsed. But it wasn't. It worked, which meant something on the other end was open. Or worse, someone. She waited until the storm slowed, then pried open one of the old tool drawers and found a rusted crowbar. It took a few tries, a few curses, and more than one bloodied knuckle. But eventually the edge of the grate began to lift. Beneath it, darkness. A rough concrete shaft, no wider than a manhole, with crumbling stone sides slick with moisture. And there, rungs. Iron rungs descending into the black, worn smooth in the center by years of use. Ella knelt and lowered her head into the opening. Cold air rushed up from below, smelling faintly of wet earth and metal. She swallowed hard. Everything rational told her to seal it back up and pretend she'd never seen it. But everything else, the curiosity, the ache to know, the hunger that had followed her across every dead-end job and every closed door, said go. So she grabbed a flashlight and started down. The flashlight flickered as Ella descended, the beam cutting through layers of dust and shadow. Each iron rung groaned under her weight, sending faint vibrations up the wall. The shaft smelled like earth after rain, cold and wet and old, in a way that made her skin crawl. She counted each rung to stay calm: 17, 18, 19 before her boots finally met solid ground. She stood in a narrow tunnel, just tall enough to walk through without ducking. The walls were rough stone, damp with condensation, and the floor sloped gently downward, disappearing into darkness. She swept the flashlight side to side. No rats, no webs, no signs of anything living, just silence so deep it pressed in around her like a weight. She took a step, then another. Her foot slipped briefly on moss-covered stone, but she caught herself on the wall. Great, she muttered. A secret tunnel under a $400 workshop, because that's normal. Still, she kept walking. 50 feet in, the tunnel curved. Her flashlight beam caught something ahead, wood, rotted, and swollen with moisture. A door. She approached cautiously. There was no handle, just a metal latch rusted nearly shut. She hesitated, heart pounding. Then, bracing herself, she pried the latch open with her crowbar and gave the door a shove. It gave way with a low groan. Behind it was a room. Or, rather, what used to be one. The walls were lined with shelves, most of them collapsed or sagging under the weight of time. Dozens of dusty crates were stacked haphazardly, some split open, their contents spilling onto the floor. Old tools, coils of copper wire, glass vacuum tubes. A workbench stood against one wall, its surface cluttered with grease-stained blueprints and rusted mechanical parts. It looked like someone had been building something here, something strange and intricate, and had left in a hurry. Ella stepped inside, flashlight sweeping the corners. Her beam landed on something half buried under a fallen tarp. She knelt and pulled it free, a metal box, heavy and cold to the touch, with a strange emblem engraved on the lid. Not a company logo. It looked hand-etched. A circle with a triangle inside, and the letters RM beneath it. Her heart skipped. Ramirez, she whispered aloud. She turned the box in her hands, searching for a way to open it, when a sudden shift of air made her stop cold. A faint breeze. Impossible, there were no vents, no windows. She stood up slowly and followed the draft to the far wall. There, behind a stack of crates, she found a narrow gap in the stone, a secondary passage, hidden behind the structure of the room itself. It hadn't been used in decades, but the air that moved through it was fresh. She glanced back at the box, then at the passage. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just a forgotten basement. It was a gateway, and someone, maybe her grandfather, had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. Ella tightened her grip on the flashlight and stepped into the dark again. The second tunnel was narrower, carved more crudely, and colder by several degrees. Water dripped rhythmically from somewhere above, echoing like a ticking clock. Ella's flashlight beam bounced across the uneven stone, illuminating shallow alcoves in the walls, some empty, others filled with rusted barrels, decaying wooden crates, and once sealed containers whose labels had long since dissolved into unreadable stains. It didn't feel like a storm drain or an old storage cellar. It felt like something else, like a place meant to be forgotten. She moved cautiously, the floor slick under her boots, her breath fogging in the cold. The metal box she'd found earlier hung heavy in her backpack, knocking softly against her spine with each step. Her fingers still tingled from the etched symbol, R.M. She hadn't heard anyone in her family talk about her grandfather Raul Ramirez in years. He'd disappeared when her mother was a teenager. No body, no answers, just gone. One day, a respected mechanic with a thriving business the next, a mystery swallowed by gossip and silence. She'd grown up thinking he ran off. That's what her uncles always said after a few beers. Ran off with bad debts and worse company. But standing here now, flashlight aimed into the dark, Ella wasn't so sure. The tunnel widened suddenly, revealing a small stone chamber. The air felt charged, thick with old electricity. In the center stood a large iron door, different from everything else down here. Industrial. Purposeful. A locking mechanism protruded from its face like the gears of a safe. Embedded in the door's surface was a nameplate, tarnished but still legible beneath the grime. Raul M. Ramirez, 1957. Ella's mouth went dry. She stepped closer and ran her fingers over the plate, tracing the letters. He hadn't just used this place. He'd built it, or at least claimed it. That didn't match the story she'd always been told. A drunk with a wrench. A man who couldn't keep a family, let alone a legacy. But here was evidence to the contrary. Solid, cold, and carved in steel. At the center of the locking mechanism was an old combination dial, rimmed with brass, the numbers nearly worn smooth. She spun it slowly. It clicked with a satisfying rhythm, but she had no code, no clue. She sat down against the stone wall, the silence buzzing in her ears. Her flashlight flickered again. The batteries were dying. She pulled out the metal box from her bag and set it in her lap. Maybe the answer was inside. Maybe it had been all along. She found the latch, pressed gently, and heard a soft snick. The lid lifted open. Inside were papers, brittle and yellowed. Blueprints, sketches, a notebook with a cracked leather cover, and at the bottom a small brass key. Taped to it was a note in faded handwriting. For the vault. If you made it this far, you're ready. Ella stared at the key, then at the door. Whatever was behind it, her family had buried it for a reason, and she was about to find out why. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, like it had been waiting. Ella turned it slowly. The mechanism resisted for a breath, then clicked low, mechanical, final. With a soft groan, the iron door unlatched and pushed inward. The room beyond wasn't massive, but it was deliberate. Reinforced concrete walls, shelves built directly into the stone, and a series of workbenches lined with ancient-looking machinery that gleamed even in the dim light. Unlike the rest of the tunnel, this place hadn't been swallowed by decay. It had been preserved, sealed, airtight, like a time capsule. She stepped inside, her boots echoing off the smooth floor. The air was thick with the smell of old metal, oil, and something more sterile like copper and dust. Rows of journals lined the shelves, each marked with a year in neat black ink. Some went back as far as 1,948. Others were labeled only with symbols. She reached for the nearest one and opened it slowly. The handwriting was familiar not from memory, but from the way her mother used to write, quick and looping. She turned a page, then another. Diagrams, calculations, sketches of devices that didn't make sense. Engine schematics, yes, but strange ones. Power routing through coil systems she'd never seen in any auto manual. Notes in the margins. Tested alternate capacitor. Burned out. Try copper instead. Another page. City Council will never allow this above ground. Must finish here. Ella sat down at the workbench, heart thudding as she flipped through more entries. What was this place? It was like a workshop, but not for cars. Not exactly. One page detailed a design for a machine that looked like an engine, but connected to something labeled phase gate coil. Another referenced energy loss mitigation in subterranean temperature extremes. She barely understood half of it, but she recognized the obsession in the notes, the drive, the purpose. This wasn't just her grandfather's hidden project. It had consumed him. Near the back of the journal, she found something more personal, a photograph. It was faded and curled, but she recognized the man instantly. Square jaw, dark hair, grease on his hands. Raul Ramirez, younger than she expected, standing in front of what looked like the very same vault door. Behind him, scrawled on the wall in chalk, "They won't find it if they never look down." A chill rippled through her. She turned the photo over. On the back was written, "This is for her. She'll understand one day." Ella stared at the words, throat tightening. For her. Did he mean her mother? Or her? The timeline didn't make sense. But somehow, it also did. She stood slowly and walked to the back of the room. There was something off about the far wall. A faint seam, nearly invisible. She tapped it. Hollow. A hidden panel. She pressed her palms to the edge and pushed. Stone slid open with a low scrape, and what lay beyond wasn't a room. It was a vault, filled with machinery, gold, and secrets. The vault opened with a sigh, like it had been holding its breath for decades. Ella stepped inside, flashlight beam slicing through the dust. The room was twice the size of the previous chamber, and unlike the others, it wasn't built with stone. The walls were reinforced steel, curved slightly, as if this part of the tunnel system had been built like a bunker. Cold air drifted past her boots, and her light danced across rows of sealed crates, some marked with coded serial numbers, others simply labeled, "Property of R.M. Ramirez." But it wasn't the crates that stopped her in her tracks. It was the machine in the center of the room. It rose from the floor like the ribcage of some mechanical beast, copper coils, polished steel arches, and a turbine core that looked far too advanced for the era her grandfather had lived in. Wires fed into a central column, which connected to a control panel littered with toggle switches and analog meters. This wasn't an engine. It was something else. Something she didn't have a name for. Ella stepped closer, heart pounding. Her grandfather hadn't just been a mechanic. He'd been an inventor, a builder of things far beyond simple carburetors and brake pads. She reached out and brushed her fingers along one of the copper coils. It was warm. Not hot. Not dangerous warm. Like it had retained heat through the years. Or like something inside was still alive. She circled the machine, eyes scanning every component. There were notes scribbled directly onto the frame in grease pencil shorthand formulas. Voltage ranges. Cautions. One word was repeated over and over. Conduction. Then she found the metal locker at the far end of the vault. Inside, a stash of materials she didn't expect, gold bars. Not massive bricks like in the movies, but thin, compact ingots stacked in foam-lined trays. She pulled one out, stared at it under the flashlight, turned it over. There was a small engraving in the corner. RMR 12B, custom cast, manufactured for something specific. Her breath caught. There was more than a dozen trays, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. She sat back on her heels, her mind racing. This wasn't a forgotten storm drain or some secret shelter. It was a private lab, a test site, a legacy hidden in plain sight. And no one had known, not the town, not her family, not even her mother, who'd spent her life thinking her father was a failure. Ella stood up slowly and looked around, heart swelling with something between awe and grief. Her grandfather had vanished. Yes, but not without leaving something behind, not without believing someone would come after. And now that person was her. She walked back to the center of the vault and placed her hand on the machine. It felt warm again, real, waiting, and on the control panel, next to a cracked voltmeter, was a single faded switch labeled Initiate. Ella didn't flip the switch, not yet. Her fingers hovered above it, trembling slightly, as if pressing it would wake something she didn't fully understand. The silence in the vault was dense, reverent, like standing in a cathedral built for machines. Every instinct she had the cautious mechanic, the skeptical woman who had seen enough of the world to know not everything with wires should be turned on, told her to walk away. But curiosity was louder, always had been. She took a breath, stepped back from the console, and kept exploring. In a drawer beneath the control panel, she found a stack of old cassette tapes, brittle plastic cases labeled with grease pencil. Most were numbered, but one stood out not for its label, but for the handwriting on it. Curved, deliberate, and all too familiar. If it's her, she'll know. There was an old tape player sitting nearby, half buried under a cloth. She blew the dust from it, popped in the cassette, and hit play. The tape whirred, then crackled to life. "Ella," the voice said, low, tired, and unmistakably human. "If you're hearing this, then somehow, I was right." She froze. The voice was older than the photograph she'd found, worn by time, but it was him. "My name is Ella Ramirez. Maybe to you I'm just a story, a rumor. But I need you to understand. This was never about running away. It was about protecting something." Ella pressed a hand to her mouth. "What you've found, the machine, the vault, it's part of a larger design. Something I started after seeing what my prototypes could do. I didn't trust the people funding me. They wanted power. I wanted possibility. So I walked away, and I buried it." A long pause filled the vault. She could hear the man breathing on the tape, as if weighing every word. "I hoped my daughter would find this one day, but she was always too scared to look backward. Maybe that's why it had to be you. You're a builder, aren't you? I could tell. Even when you were small, you saw how things could be, not just how they are." Ella's eyes filled without warning. She sat down slowly, listening, absorbing. "If you decide to continue, flip the switch. You'll see what I saw. But if you don't, that's okay too. Just know this. You come from a line of creators. We build, even when the world tries to tear us down. Especially then." There was a soft click, and the tape stopped. Ella sat in the stillness, the tape deck humming quietly, the machine in the center of the vault humming louder now, like it had heard the message too. She stood, brushed her tears away with the back of her sleeve, and stepped toward the console. Not because she had to, but because she was ready. And this time, when she reached for the switch, she didn't hesitate. The moment Ella flipped the switch, the vault came alive with a low, rising hum, not mechanical, not threatening, but almost musical. Lights flickered along the machine's edge, old glass tubes glowing orange like fireflies. For a second, she thought she'd made a mistake. But then the power stabilized. The humming deepened, steadied. The copper coils pulsed in sequence, and a soft light spread from the base of the machine into the curved ceiling. It wasn't just functioning. It was communicating, responding, breathing. She stepped back, stunned. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a machine. It was a prototype, a completed vision, one that still worked after decades, in silence. For the next 2 days, she barely slept. She cataloged everything: blueprints, journals, technical notes. She began to understand the basics. The machine wasn't meant to power anything external. It was a self-contained energy system, converting minimal input into near-infinite cyclical output. Impossible. But it was right in front of her. Her grandfather hadn't been hiding failure. He'd hidden something that could change the way energy worked. Quietly, locally, sustainably. By the third day, someone knocked on the front door of the workshop. It was a woman in a black pantsuit, crisp, unbothered by the cracked pavement or the collapsing gutters. She held a leather folder and introduced herself with a smile too practiced to be real. "Miss Ramirez, my name is Dana Kell. I work with Sentinel Energy Solutions. We'd love to speak with you about a recent rediscovery." Ella's body tensed. No one should have known. She hadn't told anyone, had barely come out of the tunnel. And yet, here this woman stood, somehow already knowing something worth showing up for. "I'm not selling the place," Ella said flatly. Dana smiled wider. "That's not what we're here for." "Well, not exactly." She opened the folder. Inside were satellite images of her shop, the surrounding area, and a faint heat signature picked up 3 nights ago from underground. "The machine. The startup. You turned it on," Dana said, tapping the image gently. "And when you did, we noticed." Ella's mind raced. Sentinel wasn't some local firm. They were a major energy conglomerate. Private. Global. The kind of company that didn't knock, they bought. "I don't know what you think you saw," Ella replied carefully. "Oh, we know exactly what we saw," Dana said. "We've been trying to replicate your grandfather's work for years, but we never got it stable. He disappeared before anyone could finish it. Now you have." Ella folded her arms. "So what now?" Dana smiled again. "We'd like to make you an offer. One that could make you very wealthy and ensure this technology doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Ella looked at the folder, at the satellite image, at the name Sentinel. It wasn't just a choice about money. It was about control, about legacy, about trust. And something in her gut, the same feeling that had led her down that tunnel, told her this offer came with a cost she couldn't afford. Ella didn't sleep that night. Not because of the offer she'd known the answer to, that the second Dana Kell stepped out of her car in polished heels and a bulletproof smile, but because of what the offer represented. Her grandfather hadn't hidden his work from the world out of fear. He'd hidden it to protect it. From people like this. From systems that would bottle up innovation and sell it back as scarcity. And now, the choice sat with her. She sat at the workbench long after the sun went down, surrounded by diagrams and parts and those quiet, handwritten notes her grandfather had scrawled in the margins of every page. He'd been alone when he built this. Brilliant, isolated, driven. Ella didn't want to be him. She didn't want to vanish into some underground chamber and leave behind mystery and grief. But she also couldn't hand over something this powerful to strangers in pressed suits who saw only profit in it. By morning, she had made her decision. She didn't call Sentinel. She didn't return Dana Kell's card. Instead, she walked into town and visited the Glenmere Library. The librarian, a woman named Evelyn, who remembered her from high school, greeted her with a warm smile and a confused expression as Ella explained what she needed. Access to scanning equipment, a secure computer, and time. For the next 3 days, Ella scanned every single page of her grandfather's journals. She created digital backups, labeled every blueprint, cataloged each component of the machine's design with the same care she used when tuning an engine for a client who couldn't afford to get it wrong. She didn't alter anything, didn't watermark or brand it, but she added a note of her own in the same looping handwriting her mother used to sign birthday cards. "This technology belongs to no one and everyone. May it never be silenced again." Then she uploaded it, not to one place, to dozens. Open source platforms, scientific forums, underground message boards, even a few encrypted archives tied to universities her grandfather had corresponded with back in the 60 seconds. She released the entire project to the world quietly, anonymously. No credit, no signature, just truth. Back at the workshop, the tunnel remained sealed. She hadn't gone back down, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't need to anymore. The machine still hummed beneath the floor, silent to most, but alive in her bones. And for the first time, she felt like she wasn't walking in Raul Ramirez's shadow, she was walking beside him. 2 days later, Dana Kell returned. This time, she didn't smile. Just handed Ella a piece of paper, a legal threat, dressed as a polite warning. Ella didn't even read it. Just folded it once, calmly, and tossed it into the trash. "I already gave it away," she said. "All of it." And with that, she shut the door. Not on opportunity. On ownership. The letter came 2 weeks later. No return address. Just her name, handwritten on the envelope in blocky, uneven letters. Inside was a photograph, a grainy, recent one, of a group of students gathered around a half-built replica of her grandfather's machine. In the corner, barely visible, was a chalkboard with the words, "Phase Coil Test Ramirez Configuration." Underneath the photo was a typed note. "We don't know who shared this, but thank you. We're going to keep building." Ella read the note twice, then set it gently on her workbench next to the others that had begun arriving messages from engineers, tinkerers, high school robotics teams, old mechanics who had followed Raul Ramirez's work in obscure magazines decades ago. People who had found the files she uploaded. People who weren't asking to buy the tech or bury it just to understand it, to build it better. Outside, the workshop had changed. It was still small, still humble, but the roof didn't sag anymore. She'd patched the windows, replaced the crooked garage door, even put up a new sign, hand-painted in bold white letters. Ramirez & Co., Legacy Builds. She hadn't made a cent from the machine, not directly, but people had started showing up, curious, respectful, inspired. Some just wanted to shake her hand. Others brought old cars, battered and half dead, asking for help from the girl who turned a collapsing workshop into a doorway to something greater. Leo, the teen from up the street, now came by every afternoon to help. She taught him how to rebuild a carburetor, how to weld clean seams, how to listen to an engine like it was trying to tell you a secret. One afternoon, he asked if he could build a replica of the Ramirez device for his science fair. She didn't hesitate. She handed him the original sketches and said, "Make it yours." The machine beneath the floor still hummed, low and steady, a quiet reminder that power didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it passed hands without fanfare, just a blueprint and a belief. Ella never spoke to Sentinel again, but she noticed their name in the news more than once. Denials, leaks, internal audits. She smiled every time. One warm afternoon, she stood in the center of her shop, hands on her hips, grease on her cheek, and looked around. The space wasn't just fixed, it was hers. Not because she'd claimed it, but because she'd earned it. Every bolt, every patch, every stubborn problem solved with stubborn patience. She hadn't just inherited a mystery. She'd rewritten what it meant to be part of it. She wiped her hands, reached up, and flipped off the shop light for the night. As the garage settled into silence, she glanced once more at the old photo of Raul, smiling beside the machine, and she whispered, "We did it. Not for the money, not for the fame, but because some blueprints are meant to be followed, and others are meant to be set free."